Hello, sweet friends. Welcome back. It's the week of Thanksgiving. So, I have a podcast episode today about how to manage the holiday stress and the triggers and the difficult conversations and the sadness and the disappointment and all of the stuff that comes up for us over the holidays. Before we jump into things, one, if you have not yet left a review, but you are enjoying this podcast and you are listening to it on a platform that allows you to leave reviews like iTunes and all the other podcasts, everything I think except Spotify. Spotify lets you rate it, but you can't leave a review. I would please ask that you rate the podcast. So immediately after this episode, or maybe you want to pause right now, rate the podcast and leave me a review. It doesn't have to be long. Something short is fine. You can read the reviews that are there now for some examples, but it's really, really helpful for other people to find the podcast. That's the way the algorithm works when there's ratings and reviews. So I would really, really, really appreciate if you could do that. Thank you. Second thing I wanted to share before we jump in, I don't know why this is coming up for me, but I just thought it'd be nice to share because, one of my favorite things to talk about is self-compassion and not just self-compassion, but also just being really loving and kind to myself and treating myself so nicely. And today I realized I was doing something for myself today, and I was like, wow, that's really kind that I did that for myself. And so I want to share this in case it's resonating with anybody or giving you all some examples of how you can be kind to yourself in really small, easy ways. So I love to make myself lattes, tea lattes, and coffee lattes. I don't really drink a ton of coffee, but when I do, I'll have like a small shot of espresso and then I'll steam some oat milk and put it on top. And then I'll make specific like a chai tea latte or a green tea latte. Those are my two favorite. And today, what I was doing is I made myself a espresso, and I was just going to put a tiny little bit of oat milk over it, foamed oat milk. So I warm up the oat milk, and I warm up a little extra because I also made myself a green tea latte. And as I was pouring it over, I was like, I really want to dust my latte with cinnamon. So I got a little bit of cinnamon out, and I dusted the top of it with cinnamon, just like really delicious, kind, and it looked beautiful and it tasted delicious. And then I said, what would make my latte delicious? And I was like, I should dust it with nutmeg. So we have my husband loves to cook and to bake. So we have nutmeg at home, and the actual nutmeg that looks like the seed that we have to shave with a uh what are those things called? The things that you like a shredder. And so I got one of those things out and I shredded some fresh nutmeg over my green tea latte. And they are both so delicious. And it was so simple, so easy, and just a way for me to show myself that I matter and that am worth it. I'm worth taking the few extra minutes to dust some cinnamon over my latte, my coffee latte, and some nutmeg over my green tea latte. And they're delicious. All right, so just leaving that with you with an invitation to ask yourself, what small thing can I do for myself today that will show me that I matter, that will show me that I'm worth it? So think about that for yourself. All right, let's dive into the conversation. It's so funny. I have been in this like huge activation creation mode where I have so many podcast episodes ready for you guys to go. I've been drafting them, all these ideas are coming to me, and it's been really exciting. And I had not drafted this podcast episode, but I had a coaching call and in my group coaching program, The Journey, which is amazing, by the way, if you are a professional woman and you are looking for an incredible community and help in optimizing your life, your business, your career, overcoming imposter syndrome, overcoming self-confidence issues, and time management, those are the things we do inside The Journey. We overcome perfectionism, procrastination, imposter syndrome, and I help you manage your time. And so it's an incredible program. All of it is awesome. And one of my favorite parts about the program is the community. So, anyway, I'm coaching in my community this week, and a lot of questions were coming up about the holidays. And I was thinking to myself, wow, yes, like this stuff is so relevant and it's so important. And so I wanted to bring this to all of you today. And so, what we're going to do today is we are going to talk about why the holidays bring up so much stuff. We're going to talk about why some of the relationships over the holidays can trigger things that feel so raw. Even if we've been in years of therapy to work through them, they still feel so uncomfortable. We're going to talk about how to manage difficult conversations and difficult interactions, and just general strategies to make the holidays more enjoyable. And you know me, I love to dive into the actionable things, but also talk a lot about the science. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about all of it. I'm going to include a lot of data and science, and I'm going to give you something to walk away with because that's also my jam. I want you to walk away with a skill that you can actually use after listening to the podcast. Okay, so let's talk about the holidays. And let me start with me as me being my first student always, and my example of holidays. Man, holidays used to be so triggering for me, so anxiety provoking. I would get so excited about being in community with my family of origin around the holidays, and it would also create so much stress and anxiety for me. And I did not have the words, I did not have the insight. I was so disconnected from my body. I didn't even realize that I was feeling stress or anxiety. And so that was something that I had to do a lot of work on to really heal myself. And, it came from a lot of reasons. We'll talk about some of them as we go through the episode. And this year, what's coming up for me, I don't feel the anxiety or the stress as I'm showing up, but I'm feeling this unsettling because this is going to be the first year of our big holiday, which is Thanksgiving. That was the really big holiday with my mom and dad. It's going to be the first year that we do this holiday without my mom. And it's bringing up a bunch of stuff for me, a lot of sadness. I didn't have the insight that I was feeling sad, but I just realized I caught myself talking a lot about my mom and playing her favorite songs these last few days. And I paused and I was like, why am I doing this? I'm like, because my body knows, my body remembers next week it's Thanksgiving. She's not going to be there. And I'm already starting to feel sad about it. So there we go. So this year, that's something I get to prepare for. So, how do we do this? All right, so let's get started. So, let's start at the very top. Why are some relationships so triggering? Why are some relationships so triggering, especially familial ones? And by that, I mean our family of origin. Our family of origin relationships. Why are they so triggering? Well, for one, they tie back to very early emotional experiences. And we have the most neuroplasticity. Our brain is evolving the most and changing the most between 0 and 7 years old. And some literature says that it goes all the way up to 10 years old. So from 0 to 10 years old, which means that that is when you are creating your patterns, that's when you're creating your sense of safety, what's right, what's safe, what's not safe, what's okay, what's not okay. When can I stand up for myself? When can't I? All of that stuff is happening really early. So if someone hurt you in the past, if they dismissed your feelings, if you felt like you were bullied, if you felt like you couldn't give yourself what it was that you needed, and then you're going back into those old dynamics, it's going to stir up a lot of those memories. And if you don't have insight into that, even if you've been working through a ton of therapy, even if you've done all of that, it's still going to come up for you. There's this book, if you haven't yet read it, by the way, it is so good if you're into this kind of stuff. It's called The Body Keeps the Score, and it's about how our body stores trauma and how unresolved trauma. So even if we have awareness that, like, yeah, my childhood was pretty traumatic, but we haven't processed the trauma. So unresolved trauma, so trauma that we're cognizant of, but we haven't let our body feel and heal and move through. That type of stuff is the stuff that gets resurfaced over and over again when we go back into settings that trigger those experiences. Those settings could be your house of origin. So if you do your holidays in your childhood home and that childhood home didn't have great memories, all that SHIT is going to come up for you again. What other familiar settings? Dynamics, old dynamics. If it's just like a conversation with you and your sibling, that same conversation, maybe they raise their voice a little bit and it stirs something inside of you because you remember some trauma from childhood. That's going to bring up old stuff. Even an old pattern, like this is so funny. Like I was thinking about what is some really simple examples? Like who makes the stuffing? Who makes the Thanksgiving stuffing? If there's an argument over that, but what it's really underneath that is always feeling controlled when you were a kid and never feeling like you had a choice. And now it's the stuffing and you want to make the stuffing and you're fighting against your sibling making the stuffing. That is what's coming up for you. It's all of those old dynamics. So it's really important for us to understand that those emotional triggers get triggered even if we've been through years of therapy, because maybe we haven't felt, maybe we haven't processed, maybe we haven't created full awareness, or Perhaps we just don't have the tools of how do we not re-traumatize ourselves when we go back. By the way, we're talking about how to not re-traumatize ourselves later in this episode. So keep listening. All right. So the second reason why some of these things feel so triggering is really, we're going to get into the brain now. It's the neuroscience behind it. So the amygdala, which is known as our brain's alarm center, or I call it the fear center, the amygdala reacts to any sign of perceived threat. A perceived threat is when your life is actually not in danger, but your body is reading it like something can go wrong. And these can be really subtle. It could be a thing like you notice somebody maybe rolling their eyes differently, like an eye roll, or maybe you notice a tone of voice that's a little different and you start making it mean something. It could be a comment that you're perceiving as judgment or criticism. All of those things, your body will immediately take that as a threat. And your body's response to that threat can feel really overwhelming because what it's reacting to is, could this potentially bring up some of the stuff from the past? That's what's happening. And so it can feel really like raw and real. And you're like, why did they look at me like that? Or why did they say that? When really, perhaps they weren't doing anything or saying anything that had anything to do with you. Sometimes it might have something to do with you, but sometimes it doesn't. So it's important to know that because the amygdala is scanning the world every 5 to 7 seconds, looking for danger, looking for threats all of the time. That's why the human species has been so resilient and why we've stayed safe and why we've been able to run away from tigers our whole entire life. But if we're not aware, if we're not intentional, we will not redirect our brain when we feel triggered. And that's what's really important here, to know that this is what the amygdala does and to know that we can redirect our brain because most of the time we're actually safe. You know, what's really interesting? There was a study that was published in 2015, and what it showed is that this little piece is kind of obvious that if you were chronically exposed to family conflict, so if your family of origin had a lot of conflict, trauma, fighting, stuff like that, it's going to increase your emotional reactivity and with anybody, not just your family of origin. What that means is it makes it harder for you to regulate your emotions. So when you're triggered, it makes it harder for you to calm down with anybody, but especially around the people who triggered you in the past, and especially during a high stress environment, a high stress time like the holidays. So just know that. Like I grew up in a house where, there's a lot of conflict, there was trauma, there was a bunch of stuff happening that was outside of my control, and I'm a huge empath. I'm a highly sensitive person, so I feel a lot and I internalize a lot of that both because of neuroplasticity, but also because of my highly sensitive gifts. I call them gifts now because they're so helpful when I'm doing healing work with my clients. But when I was a kid, uh, what it led to is me internalizing a lot of that stuff. So just be aware because even though I experienced all that, I can still go back there and not be traumatized because I know how to be intentional. So one last thing I want to talk about here, which is why do the holidays bring up so much stress? What is it about the holidays? Like I'm going home for a weekend, I don't feel that stress. Why is it about the holidays? All right. So the thing about the holidays is this, that holidays come with expectations of joy, of harmony. I mean, think about all the movies you watch, especially the old school movies before they brought in like like the real holidays, which is what some of the movies are about now, all the drama and stuff. But like the old school movies of the holidays, it was like so kind and pleasant, and everyone's coming home and there's songs, and it's just so lovely, and the decorations everywhere. And like the Thanksgiving dinner table looks amazing. There's all of that. So, like society, commercialism, all of that stuff that puts this extra pressure around the holidays that tells us we have to make it work. We have to make it calm. We have to make it peaceful. We have to make it loving. Because if not, then there's something wrong with us. And that whole like societal pressure to make it work, that intensifies feelings of disappointment or frustration when things don't work. When we say that our family's abnormal, why are we always fighting? All those things, it makes it so much worse because now what you're doing is you're comparing yourself or judging yourself, sometimes subconsciously or unintentionally, with what you've seen in the movies, with what you think it's supposed to be. So that's another reason why it can feel so stressful. All right, so I want to shift and talk about some solutions. How do we solve for these things? So the first thing I did here is I came up with some of the most common scenarios that at least is what I hear common scenarios from coaching my clients. And then I have some other ways that we can create more peace and intentionality around the holidays. And so I'm going to break it up into solutions for the most common scenarios and then some solutions for like all of the holidays, how we make all the holidays less stressful. All right. So, scenario number one, talking about politics or any other polarizing topic. So, all of you know we just had a big election. And depending on how you lean politically, you might be feeling a lot of emotions. And even if it wasn't the election season, which it is, and so a lot of people are still feeling really activated around that, even if it wasn't the election season, talking about politics or any polarizing topic can feel really triggering. And let me tell you, friends, I was a community organizer and activist for many years before I became a physician. And I still consider myself an activist. So these topics, they used to really trigger me back in the days. so so let's talk about the polarizing topic. So what happens? So what usually happens is somebody, let's say an uncle, an aunt, a sibling, a parent, will bring something up that maybe they on purpose want to be, maybe they really want to be inflammatory. Maybe they just want to be philosophical. Maybe they just want to have a conversation. Either way, what tends to happen is that discussion can get heated pretty quickly. And especially when there's opposing opinions and things will clash, or if it's really hitting you at the heart. So, how do you handle it? So, number one, you can let yourself go for it. Let yourself get into that discussion, let yourself get into the argument, do whatever it is that you feel like you need to do to stand up for yourself if you want to do that. And if you choose to do that, I'm just going to ask for you to just pause right now and ask yourself, if I choose to do that, how will that make me feel? And is that how you want to feel? And whatever your answer is the right answer for you. So I'm not here to tell you to do it a different way. If you know inside of yourself that this is how I have to do it and this is why, and I don't care if I feel a certain way, great. Now, if you don't want to engage in these scenarios, I'm going to offer a few different things to do. Number one, consider neutral phrases like, okay, let's agree to disagree on this one. Or I'd rather not talk about politics right now. Let's just focus on enjoying our time together. Redirect the conversation. Talk about something different. Talk about, I don't know, it's basketball season right now. If your family's, if they're in the basket, if they're into basketball, talk about basketball. Talk about soccer. Talk about whatever, something that's less triggering. It could be musicians, it could be anything. But talk about something where you can redirect the conversation. And maybe you can just say, speaking of differences, did anyone see that basketball game last night? And these are kind of like silly talking points, but you get the point. Number one, create neutral phrases to shift the conversation. Number two, redirect the conversation. Talk about something that's less triggering. There's been studies that were published in the Pew Research Forum that shows that when you depersonalize the disagreement, don't make it about you. Don't make the disagreement about you. Depersonalize the disagreement. It helps de-escalate the tension. Oftentimes what happens, I think, especially with these triggering topics, and this was especially my experience, is that I felt like I was being personally attacked. My values were being personally attacked. And my emotions, my feelings were being personally attacked. And whenever you take something personal, it's going to make it so much harder to get to the other side. And the truth is, I'll tell you right now, if you have not yet read The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz, one of my all-time favorite books, agreement number one, don't take anything personal because it's never about you. People are living in their own worlds where they are the main character in their world and they are looking around through their glasses, their perception, their eyes. And really, the world is always about that person. It's always about that person. So when they bring that stuff up, do your best to not make it about you if you don't want to get triggered, if you want to keep it calm and not engage in these conversations. Okay. Scenario number two, you're being judged about something. Maybe you're being judged about a parenting choice or a career choice. So let's start with parenting choices because sometimes, especially if you're a young parent, you're going to be around other people that have a lot of opinions on how you parent. So what happens? So often we get comments like, why'd you let your kid do that? Or you should have more kids. Or you should just have kids. Maybe you don't have kids yet and you're newly married. Or maybe you never want to have kids, for goodness sakes. But in this world, there's something wrong with women if you choose not to have kids and it's your choice. And those kinds of comments feel so intrusive. It's like, hold on a second. You don't know my life. You don't know my relationship with my children. You don't know my personal like interest. Maybe I just don't want to have kids because I don't want to have kids. Or maybe I do my best to take care of my kids. And the way they're acting right now in this moment doesn't reflect my parenting. Maybe they're just exhausted, tired, triggered. Maybe it's too loud in this house, whatever it is. So, how do you handle it? So, one way to do it, if you wanted to, is especially for the comments like, why do you let your kids do that? If you're interested, respond with curiosity. Oh, that's interesting. What makes you say that? If you want to. And I will tell you right now that when I was coming up with all these talking points for you guys, that's like the first one for me is always like, what would it look like if I was responding with curiosity? I'd say, ah, interesting. But honestly, I don't even think I would engage. I don't even think I would say interesting. What makes you say that? Because honestly, I wouldn't really care. I wouldn't want to hear what makes them say that. All I would do is create a boundary, a really kind, loving boundary where I would say something like, that's interesting. Thanks for sharing. And then move on. I wouldn't engage. I wouldn't ask. Same thing about having kids. Like, why don't you have kids? Just say, I'm not interested in having kids. And then I would just move on. And here's the thing, you want to be able to shift the conversation into something else because, especially the conversation about why you're not having kids. I just think about all my aunts right now who like don't know when to stop. And you tell them, I just don't want to have kids. But why? They bring so much joy. Da, 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 da. Like, hey, man, I just don't want to have kids. Sometimes what you need to do is say, oh, thanks for sharing that. I'm not really interested. Anyway, have you heard of blah, blah, blah? Or can you pass me the mac and cheese? So you want to decide how you want to engage in those conversations ahead of time. The reason why I say that is when you can decide ahead of time, what is it about? Like, what are these conversation topics that are going to be triggering to you? Is it parenting for you? Is it a career choice for you? Is it, relationships? Like, why aren't you married? Know ahead of time what it is that is going to create that trigger in you. Maybe it's politics and decide ahead of time who you want to be in those situations. Okay, if they ask me about my parenting, I'm not going to take it personal. I'm going to know that this is just them and I'm not going to let it reflect on how I actually feel as a parent. I feel like a great parent. I'm loving, I'm kind, my kids feel accepted. So I'm not going to let that internalize. So I'm just going to return that. This is what I say. I'm just going to return that comment to the earth. The earth will know what to do with it. I'm going to return it to the earth. That's not my comment. It's not my belief. I'm not internalizing that. Okay, the last scenario I want to talk about, and this is a scenario that I have to deal with this year, is missing a loved one during the holidays. So this could be because someone just decided to not show up this holiday season, or for me, it's the death of a loved one. So I'm going to talk about the death of a loved one. So so what comes up? Usually when you have a holiday and it's the first holiday that you're spending without this one, maybe it's not the first, second, third, fourth, it doesn't matter. Maybe every holiday, maybe every one of their birthdays, you feel sadness, you feel grief, you feel, like what disappointment that they're not there. What's really important to know is to notice what's coming up for you ahead of time. Because when you're not present to what's coming up for you, the sadness, the disappointment, the grief, you're going to try to avoid it by doing things that we often do to avoid emotions, or sometimes I call it buffering. You buffer the emotions with something, or some people call it numbing out. So for me, one of my go to things that I used to do to buffer or to numb out is do other stuff, take a bunch of other actions that were unnecessary. What would that do? It would create a ton of stress because if I had to feel stress, then I didn't have to feel the sadness. And so, what's really important is to know what emotions are going to come up for you. For me, sadness, grief, and probably disappointment that she's not there. It's going to make me really sad when we're deciding how to cook the stuffing and she's not making the stuffing because my mom made bomb ass stuffing. And same thing with gravy. She made amazing gravy. And her recipe changed every year because she cooked from the heart. So, and it didn't matter that her recipe changed every year. It was always delicious. And so for me, all those emotions are going to come up for me. I think, at least I perceive that they will. And if I know that they're going to come up for me, I ask myself, what do I do when I'm trying to avoid those emotions? So I said one is do a bunch of other stuff, like take a bunch of actions that create stress. And the thing is, the stress isn't just your stress, by the way. When you're in those like hyper action, you're in the hypervigilant state, always taking a bunch of actions to avoid a feeling. Everybody feels that around you because that's just the way energy works. That's the way mirror neurons work. That's how empathy works. Everybody will feel the stress you are creating. So if you think it's just you, it's not. Your siblings are going to feel it. Your kids are going to feel it. Everybody will feel it. So that's one thing I do. The second thing I do is I will project my sadness and I will project it as frustration or anger towards somebody else, somebody I love. Maybe I snap at my kids or I snap at my husband. And that's not fair. It's also like not kind and not who I am and not who I want to be. So know ahead of time what emotions are going to come up for you. And then ask yourself, when these emotions come up and I'm not being honest with myself, how do I avoid them? And then we can think about how to handle it. So, how am I handling this? So, the first thing I'm doing is I'm being really intentional. I'm spending some time up front thinking about it. I'm getting clear on my emotions, my patterns, the way I act when the emotions come up. And then I'm setting an intention now. So, when I get sad, I'm going to let myself really feel. I'm going to let myself cry. I'm going to let myself be held by my sisters or my husband. When I feel sad, if it feels too overwhelming, I'm going to let myself take a break. I'm just going to go sit quietly by myself for a little bit. You can also enroll somebody in supporting you. So for me, that's my husband. And the way it looks for me is I'm going to tell him ahead of time. He already knows. I'm because he's smart and he loves me and we've been together for a long time, but he already knows that these holidays are not going to be easy for me. And so I'm going to tell him ahead of time, hey, I'm really concerned about this holiday. Like, I'm really concerned I'm going to be really sad and that I'm going to cry. And I don't want to avoid that feeling. So I'm going to just ask for your like loving accountability. If you notice, can you just like hold me or ask me, like, do I need time by myself? And I'm going to do my best to not snap at you or anybody else because that's just not fair. That's not who I want to be. So, another way to manage some of the common scenarios. All right, let's go on. Let's talk about a bunch of other strategies to enjoy the holidays. So, what I did here is I created a list of a bunch of things that I use in stressful situations that I've used in the past over the holidays and how I've coached my students. So, I'm going to give you a bunch and you choose whichever one resonates with you that you want to commit to practicing if they make sense for you. All right, here's the first one. The first one's super simple, and I do this with my husband and kids every year. And we actually do it all the time. Before we go on a big vacation, we do it before we're going to holidays, and it's setting our intention. So we set our intention of what we want to create over the holidays ahead of time. So the way it looks is we are maybe in the car on the way to the airport, or we're at dinner the night before we leave somewhere, and then we say, so, family, and it's usually me that starts the convo. So, family, what's our intentions? What's our intention for this trip? What's our intention for this week? What's our intention for Thanksgiving? And we go around round robin. I have a 7 and a 10-year-old, and we've been doing this for about 3 years now. So, ever since my 7-year-old was 4. Oh my gosh, the stuff he'd come up with in the beginning was so cute. And he's 7 now. So it works for even young kids. So we go around robin, and people will say things like, oh, I want to have a lot of fun, or I want to laugh a lot. Um, for me, it's like I want to create a lot of meaningful memories with my sisters and my siblings, my siblings and sisters, same thing with my sisters and my kids. So we'll go around robin. So that's the first question. And then we ask, well, what's going to get in the way of that? What's going to get in the way? Like if my son says, I just want to play with Sammy and Joshua, those are his cousins. I just want to play with Sammy and Joshua a lot. So I'll say, what's going to get in the way of that? And he'll say something like, well, if we're fighting about a toy or we don't agree about a rule of a game or something like that. So we get really clear on what's going to get in the way of our intention. And then the third question is, if that comes up, what will you do about it? If you start fighting over a toy, what will you do about it? And he'll say, well, I'll just say it's not that important. I'll give him a toy and find something else to play with. And we go and do that. And guess what? Intentionality is incredible. So listen, intentionality has been studied for hundreds and hundreds of years, or practiced, I'm sorry, for hundreds of years outside of the Western world. It's been practiced everywhere. And we've adopted it inside of the Western world, and we do what we do best, which is we create a scientific study to study it. And what we have seen is that when you practice intentionality, it primes your premotor cortex, so the part of your brain that's telling you what to do. It primes your premotor cortex to do what you say you're going to do, which is why intentions are so powerful. When you think ahead of time of what you want to create, guess what? You make it happen because you enroll your brain into making it happen. So that's one thing we do. Set your intentions ahead of time. So that's strategy number one. Strategy numero dos. Number two, prepare mentally for the stuff that's going to trigger you. I love this so much. So this is something I teach all the time and practice myself. If you are engaging in an environment that used to once be triggering, what you want to do is prepare yourself to not get re-triggered. So what do? What you do is you think ahead of time. Why did that trigger me? What was it that I needed in that moment? What was it that I didn't give myself? And then you think about, okay, when I go back into that moment, assuming the person that triggered me in the beginning is not changing, they're going to be exactly who they've always been for the last 30, 40 years, and they're going to do the same thing they always do, which triggered me in the past. How do I want to show up? Who do I want to be when they act the way they act? So, what does this do? Number one, lets you practice radical acceptance. They're going to be who they are. So, knowing they're going to be who they are, knowing you can't change them, how do you want to show up when stuff like that happens? If somebody raises their voice really loudly, how do you want to show up? I want to take a deep breath. I want to remind myself that I'm safe, that it's okay, and I want to stand my ground. And you come up with whatever response you want for yourself. So there was a study that was published in the Journal of JAMA, Journal of the American Medical Association, JAMA Psychiatry, that shows that when you are intentional about these things and you practice this sort of mindfulness in the moment, it can reduce your stressful experience by 40%. So it's huge to think ahead of time about those kinds of circumstances. The other one, number three, is I want you to set boundaries early. So think ahead of time about the boundaries you want to set. So, for example, maybe it's a boundary around a conversation. So maybe you communicate your limits ahead of time. You can say something like, hey, is it okay if we don't talk about politics tonight over dinner? I really want us to enjoy our time together. Is it okay if we don't talk about me not having kids? Like, it's on the table. I don't have kids. I don't want to talk about it, or whatever it is you want to talk about. The other thing that's helpful with these boundaries, it includes not just conversations, but also time boundaries. Like, okay, we're going to go at this time and I'm going to be comfortable leaving at 6 p.m. If I decide that I want to stay later, I'll choose to stay. But if not, I'm going to be totally okay leaving. The reason why it's important to set those types of boundaries is because think about what comes up when you want to leave a big event like that. People are like, don't go, stay, you're already leaving. And all that stuff comes up. And then feelings of like guilt or disappointing other people may come up for you. And what you want to do is have thought about those things ahead of time so that when all that stuff comes up, you can say, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and go home. Thanks. Yeah, it was so wonderful to see you. I love you all so much. This was so great. Can't wait to do it again next year. And then you're comfortable leaving because you've already set that boundary ahead of time and you know why that boundary matters to you. I want to prioritize my mental health, my well being, my peace of mind. So set your boundaries, get clear on your whys, love the reasons behind your boundaries that you're setting, and then practice them in the real time. One thing that you might want to do too, if you're somebody that's going to set boundaries, is enlist an ally. I'll give you an example. Maybe it's you and your significant other, and you tell your significant other, hey, I really want to leave at this time. Can you help me with that? So when that time comes, maybe they can nudge you and say, hey, it's almost that time. Or when you start saying goodbyes and they're like, oh, we got to go. And everyone's like, don't go. Maybe your significant other says something like, I know it was so wonderful, but we really have to get going. And so you can enlist somebody to help you with that. Same thing with the conversations. Enlist somebody to help you with the conversation boundary. Okay. There's maybe two or three more. Let me see if I can remember them all. The next one is redirecting the energy of the group. One thing that I have realized is that if you don't plan intentionally about what you will do over the holidays might create times that are boring. Maybe people are just like arguing or doing a lot of like drinking. Drinking is fun, but maybe too much drinking. There's nothing intentional happening together. So one thing you can do is plan ahead of time for the kind of activities. Maybe you bring a deck of cards, maybe you create some games, maybe you choose an intentional movie you want to watch, maybe it's cooking together. Whatever it is that you really want to think about, how you want to direct that energy, and it's in a way that's intentional. And you don't have to do it by yourself. Enroll people that are going to be there. So for me, I'm going to text my sisters and say, hey, wouldn't this be fun? And I'm already taking a bunch of games for me for the holidays because it's fun when we're going to be around the house to play games with my nephews and nieces and sisters. There was another study that was published in 2020. And what it showed is that when you engage in collective activities that foster positive emotions, so like whatever that is, maybe it's a funny game of like, I don't know, Sorry or Clue or Monopoly or whatever games that don't cause triggering. Because if you're in a family that's really competitive, Monopoly might not be the game for you. But whatever game it is that feels fun and easy, low stress, those types of things, they improve positive emotion and reduce conflict when you get everybody around one of those collective activities. Okay. Let me see. So this next one is knowing when to step away, which is kind of another boundary kind of conversation, but I kind of put it under this its own bucket because I feel like it's a compassionate practice, a self-compassionate practice. Knowing when you need to manage your emotions, knowing when your own stuff is coming up for you, and knowing when you need a break to step away. So if a conversation becomes too intense, if somebody's yelling and you're like, well, this isn't going to work, know when to step away. You can be like, oh, I'll be right back. I got to grab something out of my purse or bag or go to the bathroom. And maybe you just step away for a few minutes. Maybe you go outside for fresh air. Whatever it is that you need to give yourself in the moment, just know when it is that you need to step away and give yourself permission ahead of time to do it. Give yourself permission ahead of time to do it. All right. The last one is kind of a more generic one, but I think it'll work around the holidays if you do it with the intention of improving the holidays, and that's choosing gratitude. So on if you're returning to, house of origin that used to be triggering and you're doing it for a reason that matters. Like, I love my parents. They could be triggering, but I love them and I don't want to have a distant relationship where we're just, we're kind of estranged. So I know why I want to return, but I know how it's not always great. One thing you can do is choose gratitude. So there's been a lot of research around gratitude. And again, gratitude is one of those things practiced for centuries and centuries and centuries. We know it works. But again, we do what we do well in the Western world. We study it. And we show that when you actively practice gratitude, I'm so grateful for XYZ, it releases all your feel good hormones, serotonin, dopamine, all those types of things. It improves your mood. So if you wanted to do it around the holidays, what you could do is write down 3 things that you're really grateful for about this Thanksgiving. I'm really grateful that I'm going to get to spend quality time with them. I'm really grateful that I get to have my mom's stuffing if you get to do that. I'm really grateful for whatever. So what we have shown is that around the holidays, if you're practicing gratitude, specifically about that day, it's going to improve your mood by 25%, according to some research done by UC Davis. So there you go. Lots of ways for you to prepare yourself for the holidays for all the stressful stuff that can come up. One last thing I want to share. This episode's getting a little long, so I got to cut it off here. So, but one last thing I really want to share is what I have learned over and over and over again in my own personal experience and coaching my really smart, amazing clients who I love so much is that when you start having these tools of awareness, maybe you read a book, maybe you're listening to this podcast, maybe you're one of my coaching clients. When you start having all of these tools of awareness, it opens something up for you. So now you're not just like smart and successfully, like professional successfully. Now you feel enlightened, you feel aware. And sometimes what can happen is you start to feel, even if it's subtle, even if it's subconscious, you start to feel like you're better than other people. You're better than your family, better than your sisters. I manage this so much better than they do. And that is poison. That is poison, my friends. It's poison. Because what that will do is you will start creating the subtle energy of arrogance. And it's so subtle. You won't have awareness around it because you think that it's true. You think it's objectively true. I am better. I am smarter. I do these things better. But the truth is, it's not. It's an illusion. The whole concept of separateness is an illusion. The comparison is an illusion. And it's going to create a lot of division. And the truth is, the real flex in life, the real flex when you have all these tools is to have the brains, the brilliance, the awareness, the enlightenment, the mindfulness, have all of that and know that does not make you better than anybody else. That does not make you better than anybody else. I've been doing this work for 10 years. I learn so many things all the time. And I know that when I'm coaching my students and my clients, I know that I don't know better than they do. That the only person that knows what's right for them is them. And it's the same thing when I come back to these environments, because whenever you show up, even subtly, like you might know better, it's going to create judgment. It's going to create divisiveness. It's your ego showing up and getting in the way of you creating true connection that's loving. So don't let that get in the way. Don't let it get in the way, friends. Just remind yourself, wow, interesting that that's coming up for me. But I know I don't want that to get in the way. I just want to be loving and kind. And the opposite is some of us think like, but I do know better and I'm still loving. No, no, no. When you think you know better, what's happening is you're judging. You're judging yourself, you're judging them. You're judging them as less than you. And judgment is a huge barrier to compassion and to love and acceptance. That's not what we want. All right, sweet friends, I hope this was helpful to you. We covered a lot of stuff today. We covered why the holidays are so triggering. And then we talked about some of the most common scenarios and discussion topics that come up that create a lot of triggering experiences for us. And we talked about some really common strategies to generally enjoy Thanksgiving and any other holiday that may be coming up for you. I love you all so, so much. I hope you found lots of value in today's podcast episode, and there's something you can take away and start practicing. Quick reminder that if you have not yet left a review, maybe leave a review of your biggest takeaway from today's episode. That would be helpful. And rate the podcast. And when I say helpful, I mean helpful to me and future listeners, because the way I can help more people is by them listening to the podcast. At least that's one of the ways I can help more people. So I'd love your help doing that. All right, friends, have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful holiday. And I will see you all next week. Adios.